Hey everybody, this is Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com here in San Diego, California. So for all things Vespa, whether you're restoring a vintage bike or you have a new Vespa and you want to add some cool accessories to it, check us out on the web, ScooterWest.com. So we're on to part 7 of the restoration of this beautiful condition P200. And the reason I say restoration is it's not really a restoration because we're not painting the frame and all that, but just the idea that a scooter sat without use for a long time, it usually needs quite a bit of maintenance to get it back to a roadworthy shape. And all my prior videos on this scooter have covered all the steps you would typically need to do to get a scooter like this back on the road. If it's in a lot worse condition, you may need to do much more than what I've done on a scooter like this, but kind of gives you a good idea. So this is the last episode. We're just doing the last thing I got to do to this, the final touches, and sadly we can't find any keys that work with this scooter. I have a big bin of just tons and tons of random keys. I tried all these different keys to see if I could work these locks. Unfortunately, I don't have the locks. So I'm going to show how to replace both the column lock, the glove box lock, and the seat lock. In the electrical section, I replaced the ignition lock. That's a pretty simple one to replace. Let me get into what parts you'll be needing to do those replacements. So start with the steering column lock. Essentially this lock, it just has a hardened steel pin that engages with the fork tube that locks the steering in the far left position. The most common replacement steering lock is the 4mm wide tab steering lock. Part number 152096. It's a quality Zotti brand lock, same as the original lock that's in most Vespas. On the later Vespa P200Es, it may take a wider lock, and part number for the wider lock is 154724. It has a wider tab on it. And you can also get a combination that has matching key for both the glove box and the column, part number 139188-W, and it has a matching key for both the wider style lock and the glove box lock. And we'll get a little further into the job. I'll show you how to tell which one you have. Pretty easy to check it out. For the replacement Zotti glove box lock, part number 1393795, and it's a complete replacement lock. Looks a little different compared to the original lock that was found on this early P200, but functions exactly the same. The kit includes both the return spring and the clip that retains the lock. So part that typically gets damaged when you're replacing the lock is the cap that goes over the column lock and the 2 rivets that retain it. I'd highly recommend getting these 2 parts if you're going to change out this lock. It is possible to reuse them, but your success may vary. Part number for the cap is 174628. The pair of rivets is 174629, and they're sold individually, so you need 2 of them. If you're only going to buy one part, I'd definitely buy the rivets, and I'll show you how to remove this cap without breaking the rivets off in the steering column itself. That's always bad news if you break the rivets off. You're going to need a carbide drill bit to drill these hardened rivets out. So the last lock on these scooters is the seat lock. So starting with the P200 and the P125X, they were the first Vespa that had a locking seat. Made by Zotti as well, just like the original lock. Part number on this is 190013, and the way it works is there's 3 screws that hold it in, and it pretty much disengages from the peg, and if you lock it, you can no longer push the button. I've always thought it kind of silly to lock a seat, but I want to have a complete set of keys for this scooter, so I'll go ahead and put the seat lock on as well. So we'll start with the most difficult lock. I'm not going to show how to break into these scooters if you have everything locked down. Right now, nothing's locked on this scooter. Everything's just left unlocked. It's just the keys are lost. But unfortunately, to replace the column lock, if you don't have the key, we're just going to have to drill the lock out, and I'm going to show you how to successfully do this task. First of all, I want to protect the floorboard and floor rails from the shavings. You could put some type of drop cloth or anything The shavings aren't going to hurt anything. They're just brass shavings that, you know, may fall down. Same with this area. You can buy something like this, pretty much just saran wrap, like clingy saran wrap, but it's kind of specialized for like auto body, you know, protecting stuff. And I'll just take a piece of that and kind of stick it in there, just to kind of deflect any of the stuff that I drill to drop onto my drop cloth or my piece of drop plastic. So the first step is we want to get that cover off. A lot of people fail at this. They end up just breaking the rivets off. You don't want to pound on it. You just want to take a set of pliers. We'll start with this. Some are really difficult. Sometimes they're not so difficult. And just grab it from the side and just rock it. You know, just slowly rock it back and forth, and it will start working the rivets free. See how I'm just rocking it just a little bit, and I kind of want to get on top of it. You know, one rivet's definitely coming out a lot easier than the other. You just want to ease it off, because if you bend it too much, you'll just end up breaking the rivet. So, and exactly why you want to have a cover, I've already cracked this pop metal cover. I can tell you the inner rivet is very loose. This outer rivet is definitely being a little more picky. And this is definitely one of the more difficult ones. If this has been changed a couple times, it's gonna be very easy, because the holes that the rivets go in are probably already been, you know, ovaled out a little bit, but it's starting to slowly come. So let's see, there we go. So it broke the cover. You can see the rivets are a little bit deformed, but they both have successfully been pulled out without leaving a broken rivet behind. And you just, the only motion I was doing is just little rocks, and then I flipped it upside down, little rocks back and forth. Just take it slow. Don't worry if you destroy this, because the goal is not to break the rivets off or damage the paint on the scooter. So the way you can determine what lock your scooter uses is measurement of this pin housing right here. It's where the pins for the lock reside. And the width of this is about 4 millimeters for the more common style. The very latest or last P's made had a wider one, which was a little bit stronger lock. It was 6 millimeters wide. And of course the slot that's cast into the column is wider to accommodate the 6 millimeter style. This one's a 4 millimeter style, and you can just make a basic measurement to figure out what lock you need. So here's a brand new 4 millimeter replacement lock, and the goal is to drill all the pins out where we'll be able to turn this lock and disengage the remains of the lock. If you drill it so far and destroy all these parts, you're gonna have much more difficulty removing this lock. So the goal is to just carefully step up the drill bits in size. We'll start with a small drill bit, and I'm only going to drill as far as where the pins are. The pins already reside right here. We'll go about there. I might even use a drill bit that doesn't have quite the taper on the tip at the end. And when I'm getting close to running the last drill bit, you can use your new lock as example. Put tape on the drill bit as a stop indicator, because it's really easy to just overdo it. So I'm starting with a 1/4 inch drill bit. I'm getting right on level with the lock. I'm trying to stay as centered as I can, which is a difficult task sometimes as you're drilling into a slot that normally accommodates a key. And just want to get a good start. It typically wants to drop down to the lower position of the lock. And this is soft brass is what you're drilling into, so. And it's catching the pins is what it's doing. And I could just sight down there and see what pins and how far I'm going, or I could put tape on the drill bit. We're pretty close to the end right there. So start with a 1/4. Oftentimes that may be enough. And you just stick a flat blade screwdriver in there, and if you drilled enough and killed all the pins, you should be able to turn the lock counterclockwise, and if it's turned enough, you'll be able to just pull it right out. So essentially I drilled out the pins so it no longer functioned, but you can see when you turn this, it lines up that little pin so it pulls out of the slot. And I've made very little mess in here, just drilled this just enough to remove the lock. So I just want to test fit my lock. Sometimes they have little burrs on the brass that may cause it not to function before I put grease on it. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the key in, turn the key counterclockwise, and insert the lock. So that's the unlock position. Let's just see if it functions. So it's staying there and locking the column. You always want to make sure it works. Maybe this will not engage. That may be an indication that your steering column has damage. If somebody's tried to steal it, there's a chance that the hardened steel pin won't go into the lock. But this one's working perfect, never been messed with. Next, I'm going to put a small amount of grease on the lock tumbler itself and slide it in for the final time here. So a little bit of grease, that actually might be a little bit more than I need. Kind of wipe some off, just to kind of keep it from rusting in there. Even though that is brass, but there's some steel parts and this the part of the lock that's in the frame is cast. So we'll go ahead and leave it like that. Pull the key out. We know it works fine. Now I'm going to put the cap on. So I have a set of round punches that are similar size to the heads of the rivets and a mechanic's hammer to tap the new rivets in place. So we'll start by positioning the cap over the lock. So I'll start with the inside one, kind of just sight where the rivet needs to go, and you can just give it a couple little, get that one started, then move on to the next rivet. And you just want to strike it pretty square so you don't slip or you damage. Last thing you want to do is break the rivets, these brand new rivets off. And I'm kind of doing it off to the side, so I'm actually struggling with this a little bit. I pretty much used the mechanic's hammer from the top and tapped them as far as I can go. And you could tap the rivets the last little bit with a punch. Just make sure you're very square on the rivet head. And be careful not to slip off the rivet. And once you know that's all the way seated, the rivets, sometimes they'll sit in there. These ones are a little bit larger, so they sit just slightly outside the cover. The cover should be very tight. And then we'll double check the operation. Shouldn't be any issues here. And it works perfect, and the steering column's locked. So now that we're past the difficult lock, the steering column, we're gonna move on to the glove box. Fortunately, this glove box is unlocked. It's gonna be a lot more work if it's locked. You'd be doing drilling, all that stuff. I'm not gonna cover that. So I have the new lock that also includes a spring and the clip that retains it. Oftentimes I like the original clip that came with it. It just seems to be better quality than the replacement clip. And I'm probably gonna use the original spring because it's black coated. You can get the spring out of here pretty easy. It just pulls right out. The new spring's like a stainless spring. And then just pull this clip right out and the lock will just drop right out. Sometimes I'll lubricate these locks. Let's just see how it works without lubrication in it. Sometimes they're just fine. I'm gonna use the original clip. You know what? I'm gonna put a small amount of grease on here because it's a little bit of friction, I can tell. You can see these wear marks where the lock slides. So a little bit of grease goes a long way. We'll just put a small amount on these contact points. where the lock slides. And then also on these inner points. And one other thing to keep in mind, there may be some roughness here. You could take a file and clean this up a little bit. So just a real small amount of grease on these edges where it slides on the painted surface. Only takes a tiny bit. And let's see how this works now. Get the clip in there. Much better. And now we'll install the return spring. And you could just pretty much get it into this little cavity right here and slip it right in. It's pretty simple to do. With your fingers, don't even need a needle nose. But now the lock works fine. Next we'll see if the lock latches. So sometimes they'll need adjustment. That's fine. So it looks like it's holding the door. And if it's locked, you can't get it open. If you unlock it, no problems there. So if you leave the key out, latch stays. And there's just a little bit of vibration there. If you want, you can bend the door. We'll see how it sounds when it's running. You can distort the door to make sure it contacts all these rubber buffer points on the glove box to eliminate or minimize the rattle that comes from the glove box. Sometimes you can 100% eliminate it. So I'll save the old original lock just in some hope that maybe somebody find a key for it. I doubt it. Go in a bag of goodies that goes with the scooter. So last, we'll replace the seat lock. Pretty straightforward. If you have a seat that's stuck, of course you need to drill out this whole mechanism to get it to free up. 3 screws that hold this seat lock in place, or bolts. You need a 7mm wrench. They got little spring washers in there as well. And the last screw. Then the lock will just pull straight out. And take your new lock. I'd recommend putting a small amount of grease inside the mechanism. This shutter mechanism here that catches the pin. You don't need to put too much on there. Go ahead, insert the lock. And you may need to push on it to push the upholstery in order to get the screws all started. And I suggest starting all the screws before you go ahead and tighten them down. And one thing to keep in mind, if you over tighten these screws, it will often bind up the mechanism. You may wonder why the new lock doesn't work. Well, maybe these screws were over tightened. Make sure I didn't do the fatal error. Works perfect, no problems there. So next we're going to put the seat on. I noticed the original hinge for the seat takes quite a bit of effort. I'm almost lifting the seat to even flex it. It's not the worst I've seen. I've seen times where it's so stiff that it ends up breaking this hinge right here. It's just a metal pin in the steel stampings. And I'm just going to put a little bit of penetrating lubricant. This is a Worth HHS spray. That's really good quality stuff that stays behind, unlike WD-40 where that stuff usually evaporates off. And just exercise it in. It's already way easier. It doesn't need to be perfectly smooth, but now I'm not lifting the seat. You can see there's very little effort now. Kind of wipe up the excess that's left behind. So we know there's no problems with the tank. I'm going to go ahead and put the pair of fasteners that hold the rear section of the tank. They're going to be all the same size. These are the original fasteners that were from the scooter, kind of in the gold color, a grade 8.8, just regular 8mm bolt. And you may need to move the tank around just a little bit. And I suggest just starting everything. You can get all these started. Don't tighten any one bolt down. And we already know that's tight. That's the spike that the seat latch engages in with. I'm going to hold my seat and start with the frontmost bolt. And you can see I already have the split washer and the flat washer with the bolt. Sometimes you have the helmet hook that you'd sandwich between the seat latch. Just make sure they all are started before you go tighten anything down. So the seat's kind of rocking around. I just want to tighten this enough where I can move the seat around, because oftentimes it needs a little manipulation and adjustment to get it just where it functions perfectly. So not all the way down, but just enough where I can move it around. And you see how everything still moves around just a little bit. That's where I want to leave it. And then the back set, we can go ahead and snug these two. So I'll move on from a T-handle to a ratchet to get a little more leverage on these bolts. If you want to torque them, about 16 foot-pounds. And one thing to keep in mind, there's like this weird rubber gasket that's kind of like a tan color. It's the original gasket, still in really good shape. You can get a replacement gasket. Just good to have that isolates the tank from the frame. So now that we know this moves all around, I have the key. I'm gonna try to sight the latch. I'm gonna look underneath, and typically you want that peg to be right in the center of the hole. So I dropped it down, it's latched, no problem. Go ahead and push the seat latch, unlocks perfectly. I'm carefully lifting the seat. Try not to move these bolts here. That's just right where I want it. So now I'm gonna go ahead and tighten these down. And you may need to manipulate a little bit. I've kind of had the feel and the look for it, so pretty easy for me to do. And we'll double check it once again. No problem, this thing works perfect. Believe it or not, sometimes I'm fighting with them too. And if you lock the seat, of course, you can't get underneath there. It all works perfect. So I know everything works good here. I'm gonna put the set of 4 screws that holds the handlebar cover down. I'll make sure everything's all tucked in there perfectly. One of my biggest pet peeves about the P200 is the ignition key up here. On the PX, they went to the ignition key that's integrated with the column lock, which is a great idea, which pretty much all modern scooters have copied now, carry that same design on. But you never want to have all 4 keys on the ignition. So typically, if you're going to run the ignition key, just run just the key. The reason being is the keys will bounce all over the speedometer and they'll scratch the lens. And I've seen lenses completely trashed from the keys bouncing around. So I'm gonna make a spare set of keys that we'll put away, and then I'll make another set of keys. You can even put one of the little shorty quick connects so you could join them all together. So I have one set that's just a full set of keys, and then a set that have for your lock the glove box. And typically on my own personal scooter, I'll just hook them onto the luggage hook. So I have my extra complete set that I'll put away in the file cabinet, and then the set I'm gonna use. And whenever I ride my scooter, I'll just move under here and hook it right onto the luggage hook. And then go ahead and park the scooter, remove all the keys, lock the steering column, and I know my scooter's secure. So I'm gonna do the last final touches on this. Take it on some good shakedown test rides, hopefully over 50 or maybe even 100 miles. But when you get the handlebar covers on, you just gotta make sure all the wiring is pushed past the points where the screws go through. You don't want any pinched wires, that will cause a ton of problems. Kind of check both sides. And I have the wiring kind of just carefully routed just the way it was from the factory. And you pull the speedometer cable down to kind of get the handlebars to pull down, and it looks like it's all gonna line up just fine. Start with the rear fasteners. Just like anything else, wanna get them all started before you go to town, tighten them up. And you may need to push push down on the thing. And maybe take a peek up there if anything's in the way. So there we go. Started, then onto the front pair of screws. So you pretty much push the front down. These are the easy ones. The rearmost ones are always a little more difficult. And take care not to over tighten it, especially with this original plastic piece. If you over tighten these screws, it'll just pull the brass inserts right out of the plastic. And believe it or not, the handlebar cover will hold on just fine with 2 screws, but I tend not to want to get it to that point where it's barely hanging on there. I want to keep it with all 4 original screws. And I'm just moving between all the screws to get them tightened down, snugged. So last week I posted a video and I could not get it started because I made the rookie mistake of leaving the fuel tap on. And unfortunately, is what that does, even with the best carburetors, it will flood the engine out. So let's see what happens this round. Turn the key on. Probably doesn't even need the choke. First kick. Turn the choke off. It's idling perfect. Headlights working. Time to take it on a test ride. So I install a pair of mirrors, and with many vintage Vespas, they have 4 mounting points underneath the handlebar casting that take an 8mm bolt. There's a flat bracket that bolts underneath here, and then you can bolt mirrors of your choice off those stems. I'll probably do a classic chrome round mirror set, brand new on the scooter. For some reason I didn't include the mirrors. Maybe somebody just rocked it with no mirrors. Always looks cool without mirrors, but pretty good safety item to have on a scooter if you're going to use it on the street. So that pretty much sums up everything I'm going to do to this scooter, short of taking on a test ride. I'll post one last video of the scooter, and hopefully with some field testing, and I'll have the GoPro on riding around in the fun roads here in San Diego, and just kind of give my input of what I think about the P200, especially this primo example of a first-year P200 sold here in the United States of America. Until next time, this is Robot from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. Help support this channel, shop on our website, ScooterWest.com, for everything vintage. We stock parts from 40s and 50s scooters all the way up to the very newest accessories that fit the 2020s or whenever you're watching this video. Hopefully in the future electric Vespa, whatever they may come out with, we got you covered. Accessories, spare parts, we can keep you going with your scooter, keep it tuned up, or maybe you're looking for some cool accessories, we got you covered as well. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can go through our catalog of just hundreds of videos on servicing Vespas, both vintage Vespas, modern Vespas. Have lots of videos covering accessories for all the various ranges of Vespas, and some other scooter related videos, mainly Piaggio scooters, a couple other scooters I've reviewed over the years. Until next time, it's Robot here from Vespa Motorsport.